One. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Inside Movies Galore. I'm your host, David Streggy, and here in the room with me, I have with me director J.R. Brookwalter. Thank you for coming on such short notice. I know you've got a countdown on your campaign. I had a tight schedule here, so I appreciate you being able to come on and talk about your films with me.
No problem. I appreciate it. Thank you.
So, why don't we get started? How did you get involved with filmmaking to begin with, and tell me what led up to your first film, The Dead Next Door, that I see from 1989.
I think I was dropped on my head as a child, although my mother would deny that, but that's what I blame it on. No, I'm joking, of course. But she, I was told when she was like nursing me when I was very young, when I was a baby, basically, she watched Dark Shadows on television during its first, and I blame it on that. So I have no evidence to support that, but I wound up becoming addicted to that show years later in syndication when I was a child.
Well, what's interesting is Dark Shadows is my favorite soap opera to watch.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I blame it all on my mother and Dark Shadows. So, which is ironic because then I would make a lot of Super 8 short films, and that all really started because my mother had the foresight. You know, a lot of families did that I was born in 1966. A lot of families in the 60s had Super 8 movie cameras because this was before video, and that's how everybody documented their children walking and birthday parties and all that kind of stuff. And my mother had the foresight to buy a Super 8 camera and sort of document my sister and I growing up. So when I discovered that camera when I was old enough, maybe 10 or 11, to tinker around, that was really what got me going to you know, as far as the interest in making movies. And at first it was just animating Star Wars figures and just whatever I could get my hands on, basically. And then later it graduated to like splattering fake blood all over the neighbor kids and pets and whatever I could get my hands on. And ultimately, I mean, then I continued doing it. You know, the 80s came along, the mid 80s came along. I graduated high school in 84, and MTV was all the rage. So I kind of was segued into doing a lot of music videos and that kind of thing. And that ultimately led to the path that got me to making my first feature, The Dead Next Door.
Okay.
Which was basically just from dropping out of, I went to the Art Institute of Pittsburgh right out of high school for a 2-year photography course. And at the beginning of the second year, my apartment was robbed, and I said, well, I'm going to take this as an omen to just go back home, because Pittsburgh's like about 2-hour drive from Akron, Ohio, which is where I'm from.
Okay.
So I dropped out, and within 45 days, 60 days of dropping out, I basically had a check in my hands for this first seed money to get started on The Dead Next Door. So things happened very quickly after that.
Okay. And now, how did you go about and find your actors? Were many of them like local or just friends that you knew, or vice versa, just to get you kickstarted into getting production going?
I had a handful of people when I was doing the short films that I would use repeatedly, and it'd be family members and neighbors and that kind of thing. But when Dead Next Door came along, we actually held auditions, and we had a whole troupe of local actors. But what happened was, by the time we were actually able to kind of get started, we were right up against an Ohio winter, which is not a lot of fun. So everything kind of got waylaid for a period of months over the winter. And what happened is when we regrouped and were ready to continue, most of those people had just lost interest or moved on or whatever. So there were a few stragglers that remained. And we did auditions all over again, and basically wound up with a almost completely new cast. I think out of that whole group, maybe it was there's a girl, Jennifer Mullen, who plays the character of Powers. She is the only one that really came from my short film days. That sort of carried on with me, and she also did wardrobe and some other things on the film. So, but yeah, it was pretty much all people that we found, people that I had, because you're starting out, you don't really have a lot of people that when you're making a feature, it's one thing to have it short films, but it wasn't like an Evil Dead thing where I had a Bruce Campbell to fall back on. I had to start from scratch.
Totally understand. So while you were filming, was there any mishaps or anything that happened on the set that I like hearing the background sometimes of what went on in the background. Is there anything that you could remember that happened on set that you could share with us?
There were many mishaps. I mean, we had borrowed some actual real guns to use as props on the movie, and at one point during the shooting, one of these pistols disappeared and nobody knew what happened to it. Nobody would confess to taking it. We don't, still this day, I don't know if it was lost, stolen, misplaced. You know, we're shooting in a high school where my parents had gone to high school, and it was really sort of a big controversy because it's like nobody likes the idea. We were all very uncomfortable with the idea of a firearm that, although it wasn't loaded when we had it, but it's like, you know, it's like you don't know what's going to happen. But really, I mean, that whole movie was just a string of mishaps. I think I did a book years ago called B Movies in the 90s and Beyond, which I just reprinted, and that I think I covered like the first 3 chapters in the book are really, you know, the making of Dead Next Door, because there were so many. I mean, the classic one is we went down to Washington, D.C. to do pickup shots for the shots of the zombies crawling on the White House fence and nearly got arrested. And you know, the one weird thing that didn't really happen on that film that happens to a lot of filmmakers that I've talked to in the years since is we didn't really have nobody kind of walked off or left the production. Once it was in full swing, it was a very, like, some people have compared it to either Woodstock or like the Jim Jones Guyana cult. You take your pick which one you wanted to follow, but it was very weird because once everybody got into it, we were all really into it. I mean, it was a big cast and a big crew. I mean, there were probably 50 core people in that at the height of that thing, and nobody was really being paid. It was just, you know, I don't know why people stuck around, but they did, and thank God they did, because, you know, it was.
Well, yeah, I've heard the horror stories about so far with some independent filmmakers, how people will either not show up to the set or you know schedules conflict. You know?
Yeah, no, I mean, for whatever reason, we really never had. I mean, later towards the tail end, after had been shooting for months, of course, then you run into scheduling conflicts and things. But I had people that were much older than me, like in their 50s and even older, that were, you know, sacrificing jobs and giving up school and just all kinds of, you know, to come and participate in this movie. And I was one of the younger people on the entire production. Almost everybody was older than me. So for all these people to sort of look up to me as the you know, the guiding ship to guide this whole ship, you know, it's sort of crazy thought to begin with. But
okay,
it was a once in a lifetime experience. I've never, all the other movies I've ever made, no other experiences come close to that one.
Now, before I ask about its reception at the time, why don't you give us a little bit of synopsis of the Dead Next Door for the audience, and then I'll ask you how its reception was. And I understand that you had a Blu-ray release for it, just like you have for Robot Ninja coming up. So
yeah, that was 3 years ago. We raised the money the same way I go to do 2K restoration from the original Super 8 film elements. The movie basically is. It's got a kind of two parts to it. The crux of it is this doctor in Akron, Ohio, has mistakenly invented this virus that causes the dead to come back to life, which is a very sort of similar scenario to many of the Romero films or other zombie movies. But the twist is that years later, the government has decided that the best way to combat the problem is to come up with these military teams called the Zombie Squad that basically go out and try and rescue people and destroy the zombies as best they can. I mean, the thing is, they're a little bit different than the Romero zombies. You can't just shoot them in the head and they fall down. The virus is sort of throughout the body, so it's established early on. Like there's a scene where one of them gets its head cut off and the head's still alive, and it bites the fingers off one of the soldiers, and the fingers actually come out of the throat, which is always a scene that everybody seems to remember from this film. But and along the way, the Zombie Squad has to return to Akron, Ohio to try and find the original serum that caused this whole thing, and they run into a religious cult that is trying to protect the zombies and keep them I guess alive is not the right word, but keep them functioning for their own sinister purpose, I guess. So the military and the cult butt heads, and that sort of leads to the final conflict.
Okay, and how was the film's reception once you completed the? Now I understand. Did it have a VHS release at any given point in time?
It was really. It's actually it's credited a lot as a 1989 film, but it actually did not come out until 1990. I don't know. I think the IMDb got that wrong years ago.
Sometimes they screw up. I've known them to be that way.
But I finished the film in 1989, and then really it didn't come out till over a year later. A little company out of North Carolina called Electro Video put it out, and they had done their own Super 8 film called Killer that they had put out, so they had a little experience with that. But you know, it's funny because the film, I had only given out a handful of copies. There was filmmaker named Scott Spiegel was involved in the film as an actor, and he was part of Sam Raimi's group up in Michigan, and I think he was one of the people that sort of passed it along to other people. It kind of got shared, you know, back in the VHS days. This is what everybody did. People made copies of it and passed it around, and so it kind of the reaction was not immediate. It was sort of a slow build, and then reviews started coming in and different things, and so it was a much slower process. It wasn't like today where everything's like immediately something comes out and you know, everybody has an opinion about it. There was no Twitter for people to jump on and crucify the film.
Yeah, unfortunately, there are those kind of reviewers out there. And me being a reviewer myself, I know sometimes there is backlash with some of these films. So.
Well, I mean, the thing is, the reaction was actually very positive. People dug it for what it was. It was sort of seen as sort of a almost documentary style movie. I think it had, because it was Super 8 and a chunk of it was shot handheld, things like that. People liked the look and the ambition of it. You know, it's not very often where you see zombies crawling on the real White House fence, you know, with the White House in the background or the Washington Monument in the background. So there was a lot of stuff that going on in the movie that nobody had seen before, and it was the word of mouth spread once, you know, people were able to actually see it. And it was helped by, we had a big 4-page spread in Fangoria magazine back in that magazine's heyday, and that really sort of put it on a lot of people's radar because people were sort of looking out for it then. It's just unfortunate that we had that press, and then it was probably a couple of years went by before it actually was available to, you know, to buy it or rent it.
Nice. So ultimately, now you, I know I touched on this a little bit, but you had a 2K restoration of the film. How many years ago?
It was 3 years ago, 2015. I started that, and yeah, it was something I started just as sort of a lark. I thought, well, you know, I'm a Blu-ray collector myself, and I started to see all these great restorations of all my old, you know, favorite films that I was collecting, and I thought, I wonder what it would look like to scan this Super 8 film. So I sent the first reel of it out, and was pleasantly surprised as to, you know, what the results were. So that sort of encouraged me to do it. And then everybody kept saying, oh, you should try Kickstarter or Indiegogo. And so I chose Indiegogo, and you know, we raised some of the money that way, and then I finished it off, and it did, you know, it did well. We sold through, we pressed 1,000 discs, sold through those, and then I've since last year put out a 2-disc collector's edition, which is sort of the retail version. It's a little bit less expensive than the original one, but same transfer and everything.
Okay.
But in between the VHS and the Blu-ray, there was a DVD release, which is how a lot of people discovered the film more recently, because that was released from Anchor Bay, and I hear it was in Best Buys and all over the place at the time.
That's the copy that I ended up picking up myself. So
a lot of people knew the movie from that, but unfortunately, I mean, that was a remastered version in that it was a new transfer, but it was not an HD transfer. And even if you compare those two versions, it's a huge difference. The 2K just is absolutely the best way to see it.
Alrighty. So ultimately, after The Dead Next Door, you went on to another film called Robot Ninja. And now, how did you get involved with that? I mean, I know you started, did you write it around the same time as The Dead Next Door? Or?
No, in fact, it was a total opposite experience of The Dead Next Door. In fact, I was out in LA finishing the sound for The Dead Next Door when I met a filmmaker named David Dakota, and he had a company he was starting called Cinema Home Video. And the way I met him was he was shooting a film called Murder Weapon that my friend David Barton, who had done some of the makeup effects for Dead Next Door, him and a friend of his were doing the makeup effects for that film. So while I was out there, I was going on set and, you know, documenting some of the footage and stuff. And the place where I was staying in Van Nuys, California, scoring the music and stuff at the time, they were doing the makeup effects in the garage. So like Dave Dakota would show up with Linnea Quigley, who co-produced the film and starred in Murder Weapon. And, and that's how I got involved with them. And so David Barton was like, hey, you should tell Dakota, you know, you should start hitting him up. He's looking for projects for this home video label. So I actually didn't pitch him something for myself at first. I had two filmmaking friends that had their own projects, and I pitched him those, and he was interested in the one. And we had another meeting, and then it just he decided, no, maybe I don't want to go in that direction. And he said, well, what do you have? I showed him maybe 20 minutes of Dead Next Door, and he liked it. And he said, you know, what do you have? And I really didn't have anything, because most of the scripts I had written at that time, you know, he wanted to do something for like $10,000, $15,000. And to me, I just wasn't like not ready to do. Most of my stuff was much more grandiose, my ideas at the time. So I didn't have anything, but to salvage the deal, I said, well, do you have any things that you have in mind that maybe we can do from scratch? And he said, well, I have this title, Robot Ninja. And I cringed, because it's not particularly an interest of mine, because I immediately visualized probably what the movie should have been made as. It's like a kickboxing, you know, literal robot ninja, which didn't really interest me. Okay. But of course, in the sake of saving a deal, I said, well, yeah, I could probably do something with that. So I finished up my work on Dead Next Door and was going back to Akron, Ohio on a Greyhound bus, which is an experience of its own, because cross country on the Greyhound. And that's basically where I sort of came up with the idea of what it was going to be. And it was completely the opposite of probably what Dave Dakota had in mind, but he liked the pitch and liked the treatment I sent him, and ultimately liked the script, and we went in that direction. And basically what it was, the Tim Burton's Batman was finished and about to come out. I think it was coming out the month we were shooting that movie, or the month after we shot that movie in the summer of '89. So the comic book thing was really heavy on my mind. So I got the idea of this frustrated comic book artist who witnesses a couple being murdered by this gang that's sort of terrorizing his small town. And he decides to sort of don the persona of his famous character, Robot Ninja, who's currently being made into sort of a campy TV show like the, you know, Batman series in the 60s, which of course I grew up with, was a huge fan of. But he's sort of artistically lashing out and deciding he's going to take this character in another direction and make a literal robot ninja and sort of get revenge on this gang. And it doesn't quite work out for him, I hate to say, but that was sort of the idea I came up with. It was much darker, much more bleak, and way gorier probably than Dave Dakota ever had in mind.
Which is probably a good thing, because you don't always want to make every single film exactly like the next, like your previous or your next film. You kind of want to have a difference in the way that you film your art.
Well, it was an interesting position to be put in, because I had so many of my own ideas, and it was a strange thing for me to so quickly. I mean, I really had to write the script in I think the original draft was literally like 3 days, after I had come up with the core idea. So to be able to do it so quickly, and everything just fell into place so quickly, and before I knew it, the checks were showing up, and we were buying stuff, and we were making the thing, and it just all was the total opposite, because Dead Next Door wound up taking 4 years to make, and another year before it ever came out. This thing was in the can within 2 or 3 months, and then it was on video store shelves, less than 6 months after that. So it was really like an express train compared to what I had done the first time around. So you didn't have a lot of time. I didn't have a lot of time to overthink it, or to, you know what I mean? It was, it just sort of picked up its own momentum, and it turned out the way it was going to turn out, I guess, be that good, bad, or indifferent.
Totally understand. So ultimately, now, did you work with any actors on Robot Ninja that you had worked on previously with The Dead Next Door, or did you ultimately pool for different actors?
No, I didn't have time, and we did hold a few auditions, but I really had to pull from the cast that I had already. There was the lead character, his name's Leonard Miller, who plays a robot ninja, was a guy, Michael Todd, who had played the role of the Jason zombie in The Dead Next Door, and he had also been my assistant director. He stepped into the lead role on that, and the guy who played Dr. Molson in Dead Next Door became Dr. Hubert Goodnight, sort of similar role. He's even got the cheesy baseball cap that he wears in Dead Next Door in Robot Ninja. In many ways, it was sort of an extension. I looked at Robot Ninja as an extension, even though it's a completely different movie. It's not really about zombies, although there are some flashback scenes with zombies. But yeah, the cast was literally ripped right out. The main bad guy was the girl who played Anna in The Dead Next Door, and she played this character, Godi Sanchez, which was originally written for a man, but we couldn't find anybody to play it. And then we thought, oh, it'd be kind of funny to turn it into this sort of butch lesbian, bad guy. And that, you're talking about 1989 when nobody really did that. So it's sort of like, I'm not saying I was ahead of my time, but it's sort of interesting to look back on it and think that, boy, that, people do that all the time, the ghost. Oh, yeah. But at that time it was very strange. It was a strange thing to do. But yes, so the cast was borrowed essentially from The Dead Next Door with a few extra people thrown in that we knew or whatever. So, okay. But the core cast and the core crew were all from the first film.
Now, is there anything that you can remember from being on set that you can remember in particular, something that you'd like to share, while you were filming that might have been, might have been something that you could share?
It was so fast because I think we only shot maybe not even 2.5 weeks, and I'm not even sure. It was so much of it was shot at night because the movie took place at night. So we were on this weird night schedule. So everybody was in this sort of like bizarre, like, hazy. If you've ever stayed up nights in a row, you would understand it. But the main thing I remember is a lot of Taco Bell. Like we would it'd be like 2 in the morning, and the only thing that was open was Taco Bell. So somebody would run the Taco Bell for our dinner break, essentially in the middle of the night. And so that was a movie that was totally like, the Taco Bell was our fuel essentially to get through that thing. But as far as making the movie, I mean, I don't really remember a lot of specifics. I think because it went by so fast.
Okay.
It was at a much quicker pace.
So it basically went on without a hitch.
Yeah, I mean, I really don't remember too much because it was we were shooting, instead of Super 8 film, we were shooting on 16mm film. So that was a step up. The film gauge was twice as big as before. And so it was a new camera. I remember, I think the first week or first couple of days of the footage, I was running camera on the whole thing. And I was sort of getting acclimated to the camera because we didn't even have time to do camera tests or anything, which I would have loved to have done. It was sort of, talk about just sort of jumping into the deep end of the pool, right out of the gate. So I remember there was some footage on the first day or two of I wasn't quite clear on the viewfinder and the camera as far as the cropping and where everybody's heads were. I remember there was footage where the heads are sort of clipped off at the top. There's a scene where the doctor and the comic book artist have a disagreement in his apartment, and that footage always bothers me to this day because we didn't have time to reshoot it, but it was because I was sort of getting adjusted to the camera and trying to figure out what the hell I was doing. I was winging it through that whole production, essentially.
So ultimately, once you completed the filming of Robot Ninja, how was its reception? And now that did get a VHS release, correct?
Yeah, no, this movie was essentially a work for hire. I was paid basically to, a small fee to make this movie for another company. And that was the Cinema Home Video, and they released it in December of '89. And it was pretty much, I mean, I don't think there were any good reviews of the movie, to be honest. It was widely despised. And it's funny because at first I sort of got defensive about that and said, well, wait a minute. You know, I was very unhappy with the movie when it was finished. It just was not, it wasn't until we were putting the sound effects and the music and stuff on it. I scored the music as well. I have nobody to blame but myself because I wrote, produced, directed, edited, scored the music. I have a cameo in it. I mean, it's just, it was absolutely my fault. I take all the blame for it, for conceiving it in the first place. But yeah, it was not, it did okay for Cinema Home Video business-wise. I mean, they sold a respectable number of units, I was told. But it was, I mean, Weekly Variety reviewed it and just jumped all over it. And Fangoria, I think maybe 6 months after the VHS release just completely savaged it. It wasn't until years later, I mean, I literally sort of disowned the movie as being such an awful experience and just sort of moved on with the rest of my so-called career. But it wasn't until years later that people started coming up to me and saying, I really like that movie. And I'm like, wait, what? You're supposed to hate that movie, don't you know? It was a strange thing.
I know. I've heard it termed as being one of the best worst movies, or something like that. At least through some of the grapevine. So I mean,
the only thing I could say about that movie, it's a unique specimen because it's its own weird animal. There's really, I can't even think of too many movies that are even sort of similar to that film. It's its own animal, and it just there's a lot of interesting concepts in the movie that don't quite pan out, and it's just so bleak. You know, it's really like I had come off this long, excruciating process of making Dead Next Door, and I think I had a lot of like dark clouds hanging over my head that literally sort of just went into this film. And that's why it's not very lighthearted, or it's very mean-spirited and just nasty. And there's a lot of, you know, nasty language in it. And the gore is just over the top, like ridiculous. Like, you know, when somebody gets killed, they get really killed. I mean, it's not like bang, you're dead. It's like bang, I'm going to stick this gun in your eye socket. I'm going to curse over your corpse. You know, I mean, it's just all very mean-spirited. And I've never really made another movie like that either. I mean, that was sort of a one-off anomaly.
Well, ultimately later, after Robot Ninja, you went under a pseudonym by the name of Lance Randus.
Yeah, well, that actually happened later. I mean, I produced a couple films after Robot Ninja, and then eventually made a string of shot on video movies that were originally released with my name on them. And then over time, I sort of got the rights back to them and remastered them and decided, you know, maybe I better take my name off of these. And I don't really even try to hide it anymore because pretty much everybody knows that I made those films, which is fine. But at one time, the IMDb actually had a listing for Lance Randus where all those, and then something happened. They did some kind of update or something, and suddenly like all those movies went on to my IMDb page, and I'm like, oh damn. You just have to accept it and move on. What can you say?
Well, the first of these was a film called Zombie Cop. Now, when did you go into production for that?
Well, that was actually the second one. There was the Kingdom of the Vampire was shot just before Zombie Cop. Okay. But Kingdom of the Vampire I never publicly disowned. It always had my name on it. But that was after I produced Skinned Alive and worked on a film called Ghoul School in 1990. I think I moved to California, and then nothing happened there. I moved back, and that's when I made Kingdom of the Vampire and Zombie Cop, which was basically two super VHS shot on video movies for $5,000 or some ridiculous amount of money. So those were shot back to back, and then there were 4 others after that that were sort of shot the same way, like we would shoot them in twos. I refer to those films now as a 6-pack because that's what you would need to have to even entertain watching them. Any of the 6 movies at this point, the more 6-packs, the better. But yeah, so that was sort of a darker period of my so-called career, I guess, making that stuff. But you know, again, those were all made for very similar to the Robot Ninja thing because Cinema Home Video had a deal with this company called Rent Rack, we would make the box covers, which couldn't have even the cast on it. It had just artwork and then a synopsis on the back. He would send it to them. They would while we were making the movie, they were listing it and starting to sell it. And then we literally finished it. It went to the duplicators and they were shipping units to the stores, and it was all over the country. I mean, so many people remember those movies because they picked them up in the video stores, because the way the deal worked with Rent-Track is that I think the store only paid like $5 or some nominal fee to get the tape in, and then they would split the revenue with Rent-Track, who would split it with the distributor, you know, who released the film. Okay. So it was a good deal. I mean, you'd never see something like that nowadays, probably, because you know, that was back in the day when VHS tapes were $80 or something.
Totally understand. And now I'm just going to mention a few other titles here, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to have you just talk about what each of these were about. If you can remember anything from, you know, the sets, or while you were going about filming these. And I know these are some of the ones you would consider ones that you would probably have to sit through or whatnot.
I'm too old for that now. I just ignore. They're all my redheaded stepchildren at this point. You can't
Maximum Impact, Humanoids from Atlantis, and Galaxy of the Dinosaurs.
Yeah, well, that was the other half of that six-pack. Yeah, you know, I don't really. I try to remember. Maximum Impact, actually, the making of that movie was a breeze. It was like a perfect experience. It was pretty much me and like 2 or 3 other people on the crew that made that thing. It was sort of done and over with very quickly. I enjoyed, you know, working with the cast on it and stuff. I mean, I really don't have anything bad to say about it. You would have to strap me to a chair to probably sit through it at this point. Now, I remastered it along with all these movies a few years ago for this Bad Movie Police series that I created that was sort of poking fun at these movies. But yeah, no, that was a good experience. It just, you know, not a good experience doesn't always make a good movie. You know, it's sort of like Cinema Home Video wanted something that wasn't horror, that was sort of like more of an action kind of film, and that's what we made. And it's an action. We call it the cast and crew always joke that it's minimum impact, because there's really nothing really happens in the movie so much. It's a lot of like threats that something's going to happen and then it's over. Like,
if I remember correctly, did Galaxy of the Dinosaurs make Mystery Science Theater, or
it did not? You're probably mixing that up. There's stock,
the Last Dinosaur. Yeah,
there's stock footage from a film called Planet of the Dinosaurs.
There we go. Yeah, that's what I was remembering.
Dave Dakota bought the stock footage for cheap, and that we basically made a story around it, and that's how he wanted to make humanoids. He wanted to do sci-fi. He wanted to do the Humanoids from Atlantis, which was we did Galaxy first, but Humanoids from Atlantis was set in, I think it was February, March in Ohio, and when you can't even get in a lake or any body of water because it's frozen pretty much, or it's certainly cold enough to do it. So that one was going to be a problem right out of the gate. Galaxy of Dinosaurs was actually a very fun experience as far as making the movie, because I really didn't feel a lot of pressure on it. It was sort of like, you know, we already had our money shots, so to speak, because we had the dinosaur footage. So it was really all just the logistical part of it, and we were really poking fun at, you know, the whole Planet of the Apes kind of thing. I mean, all those kind of movies that we grew up with, all the science fiction movies. I love all that stuff, but we were not taking it seriously in any way, shape, or form. So it was sort of a wink, wink, you know, nudge, nudge.
And that's the way I think any person watching any of these films should take in mind, that you shouldn't take any films at all anytime seriously.
Yeah, I
mean, once you do that and have a blank mind, you know.
Well, it's hard because that's the thing. Like something like Robot Ninja, you know, it's hard to smile during it because it's so dour that, you know, it's like it's nice to have a movie like something like a Galaxy of the Dinosaurs where it's just so silly you can't take it seriously. You know what I mean? Robot Ninja is more of a target for bad criticism because it's, you know, it almost is like, you know, here it is, it's dark, you know, you have nothing, you can only dislike it because it just makes you feel so, you know what I mean?
I know what you mean. So ultimately after that, those experiences with filmmaking. You went on to do a film called Ozone, correct?
Correct. Yeah, that was, and that was really just out of frustration of having made. I literally had made 6 of these shot on video movies over like a 7-month period, and I just felt like I couldn't do that anymore because it's just creatively, it's just, you know, it's not what I want, not what I got into this for, certainly, and it just was. You know, I was subject matter that I maybe wasn't really interested in, aside from probably Kingdom of the Vampire was one that I actually did have my heart in, or felt like I did. But Ozone sort of the script fell in my lap. Some guys that had worked on Dead Next Door early on, they were going to make it, and they said, "Hey, can you help us make this?" And I read the script and loved it, and basically went back to them and said, "Hey, let me direct this. You kick in your money, I'll match it, and we'll do this, and we'll do it the right way where we have enough time." You know, we didn't necessarily have money. We still shot it, super VHS video and all the, you know, basically everything that I had learned up to that point about shooting on video, but we tried to kick it up a notch. Like back on Dead Next Door, we had made like cranes and dollies and all these things to do all these cool camera shots. And we did that again on Ozone. I sort of had all this stuff remade, so that we could make it a more cinematic experience, essentially. It's like, I did believe that it was possible to make a good shot on video movie and make it look like a movie, you know, rather than a soap opera or a home video or whatever. So that was my intention with Ozone anyways. I just felt like I had something to prove, and after making a string of forgettable bad movies that I didn't really want to make, I wanted to make something that sort of proved that Dead Next Door may not have been a fluke, I guess.
Now, going back on some of these titles before we move on, did you have any experience that you can remember on any of these titles? Zombie Cop, Kingdom of the Vampire, Maximum Impact, Humanoids from Atlantis, or Galaxy of the Dinosaurs, that you can really, you know, like pinpoint and remember, you know, that you'd like to share?
Well, Kingdom of the Vampire was notable because we got the first day of shooting, we pretty much sailed right through up until the evening when we were shooting, and then I shredded my knee while setting up a shot. Like, I mean, I basically directed the rest of that movie out of a wheelchair and crutches, and had to literally start pulling pages out of the script. I'm like, well, we don't need this, we don't need this, because I couldn't shoot it. I physically couldn't. I mean, I had a producing partner with me that we were both supposed to be setting up we were both supposed to do the lighting, and then I was supposed to run the camera, and I couldn't even do that. I had to literally just sit in front of a monitor and say, you know, do this, do that, do this, because I couldn't move around. And I remember that vividly now, because about 2 months ago I ripped up my knee. It's the same knee. I sort of had the same injury. So the only difference is I wasn't making a movie this time, but thank God. So that one's memorable because it was literally like the pain of doing it, and we pulled so much out of it that I had to. The first cut was only like 45 minutes. We had to actually go back once my leg had sort of healed and shoot some of that stuff that we had pulled out of the script, because it had, you know, it had to at least be 65 or 70 minutes or something, the running time of it. So that's the most memorable out of those 6 probably.
Okay. Cool. Now, ultimately, after Ozone, you went on to direct The Sandman. Now, how did you get into that project? And here we're starting to get into your your relationship with Full Moon.
Well, that's still a few years off, but The Sandman actually dates back to, I think, 89 or 90 probably. I had met a guy through a Fangoria personal ad of all things named Matthew Jason Walsh, and he was trying to raise the money for a film of his own, and I had contacted him just to see what he had and, you know, read the script or whatever. And I liked his writing, and we started talking, and he didn't have anything. He had no money, no budget, no hope of ever getting the thing made. And I said, well, why don't you write a script for me? And I had this idea that I'd come up with Dave Lang, who had done invented the Robot Ninja character and done all the drawings for Robot Ninja. He and I had come up with The Sandman, and so Matt came out for a while and wrote the script, and we tried to get the money raised back then, and just wasn't happening. And this is, of course, at a time where we would have shot it on 16 millimeter instead of Super VHS. But after Ozone, I was sort of at a crossroads, like, okay, now where do I go from here? We pulled this off and sold respectively. And, you know, it's like, what's the next step so that I don't bungle this again with something like a Robot Ninja. So, after weighing a bunch of stuff, I kind of went back to that Sandman script and said, you know, I really like this, but if we could just make it a little smaller. So we moved the locale, set it in a trailer park. And that's kind of how the genesis of how that one was. And that one was sort of an effort to make, where Robot Ninja was sort of like hardcore on the blood and guts, Sandman was the opposite, because at the time, Blockbuster Video was starting to entertain buying movies like this, like the lower end shot on video things. And I was eyeballing, like, maybe we can get this into Blockbuster if we make it a little more, I hesitate to use the words family friendly, but that was sort of the impetus of it. Let's clean it up a little bit, and maybe, you know, we can get a Blockbuster sale out of this, which of course did not ever wind up happening. So that was the sad irony of it, but that was the goal. And that one was a crazy shoot, because the whole movie almost entirely takes place in this trailer park. And although I wasn't personally living at the trailer, it was 45 minutes away outside of Youngstown, Ohio. I would drive back and forth every day, but some of the cast and crew actually were living there in the trailer park, and they had some crazy stories to tell about the people that lived there and things that happened and all that kind of stuff. It was definitely an experience I would not necessarily want to. I mean, it's funny because when you start, everybody's excited and like, oh, there's a movie being shot in our trailer park and blah, blah, blah. And then you get, you know, sort of like the third week of shooting or whatever. And everybody's like, when are you guys going to be out of here? When are you going to leave? You know, because you're just disrupting people's lives. And it's like, wait a minute, we're in the middle of a shot. Don't come down this street or whatever. So I think they were as sick of us as we were of them, probably. But
totally understand. So did you want to give us a little bit of surmise of the Sandman before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of was. I guess this was inspired mostly, I think, by A Nightmare on Elm Street. The idea was that Sandman is this creature that sort of gives you good dreams to put you to sleep, and so that you're not paying attention, and steals your soul. And it's basically the story of a frustrated writer who is having insomnia. He's writing like these bad, like smutty, you know, women's love romance books or whatever, and he just can't seem to get anywhere in his career. And so he's up in the middle of the night, he's frustrated, and he sees something in his trailer park that's kind of going around from trailer to trailer. And, you know, of course, he eventually discovers that this creature, the Sandman, exists and has targeted his on again, off again girlfriend who lives in the same trailer park to sort of steal her soul, as well as everyone else that lives in the trailer park.
Very cool. Now, were there any actors in any of these films that we have aforementioned after Robot Ninja that you had reused from your previous films along the way, or were?
For sure, yeah. There was a guy named James Black who had lived in Ohio, lived in Columbus, I think, and he had been briefly on the Cleveland Browns football team or whatever. He went to Akron U with my co-producer Scott Plummer, and he came in and did the voodoo doctor role in Zombie Cop, this guy Dr. Death. And then he was in Chick Boxer, he was in Maximum Impact, he was in Galaxy of the Dinosaurs, and he was finally in Ozone. And after Ozone, he actually cut a reel of footage from Ozone because he's so good in that movie, and moved to LA and wound up on a TV show called The Burning Zone. That sort of launched his career.
Nice.
Yeah, he moved on to bigger, better things.
Okay, cool. Now, after The Sandman, you did a movie called Polymorph. Now, how did you get involved with that film?
That's another one. Well, now we're in the period where these were all films that were self-generated, essentially. Okay. The idea was to finance them and distribute them and own them, essentially, and that they would be my movies. Polymorph is another one that dates back really almost to my childhood. I mean, when I was shooting Super 8 films, I had come up with this crazy story called Polymorph about this sort of alien life form that infests people in the woods. It first infests this sort of redneck serial killer who's basically like killing people and putting their bodies in this swamp near his house, and people are going into the woods and disappearing, and essentially this alien life form infests him, and then it spreads to the other people. But what had happened is I had gotten involved with an actress named Ariana Albright right at the Sandman had been shot, but it hadn't been distributed yet, and she the movie was originally going to just sort of get shelved, and I wasn't sure what to do with it. I was sort of in a weird place in my life, and she sort of convinced me to, do a few things here and put it out, and it'll be great. And then she was like, well, let's do another movie that we can do together. And I said, well, go into my filing cabinet, go through all these old ideas that I had. It was actually her and another actor, James Edwards, who they were both chomping at the bit to do something. I said, see what you guys can dig up, and bring it to me, and we'll talk. So they sort of selected Polymorph. That was sort of the way that got made. Okay. And James Edwards rewrote the script, which is quite a bit different than what my original story was. The core elements are there, but he added sort of a drug gang element to it and some other things. He plays more like a science fiction Tarantino movie or something now than the original version did. But yeah, that one. And that was actually a tough film to make. I don't know why. It was just, I remember shooting for the first couple of days, we shot all the stuff in this cabin out in the woods, and it was like where every character in the movie literally comes together in this cabin. And I'm shooting, and I'm just like, I don't know if it was that I wasn't prepared. I thought I was prepared, but I was just like, I don't know what I'm doing here. So I just had to start shooting footage of everybody throughout this action. I mean, mostly handheld stuff, just kind of has a documentary feel. But once I got through that, I sort of like picked up the pace, and it turned out to be a decent little movie. That's actually one a lot of people cite as a favorite out of all the movies that I've made. But the funny thing is it did no business, and it seems to be a lost title for some reason. But I think it's one of the better ones that we've done out of all these, especially in the shot on video days.
And I seem to remember an Indiegogo campaign that supposedly was going to go into polymorph world maybe a year ago or something like that.
No, I think you're thinking of James Edwards, who wrote the script for that film. He raised money for his own film, but they're totally unrelated. But because he probably mentioned he was selling it on the basis of having been in polymorph price. Probably yeah. But that's
I wasn't sure. I just remembered it going on, and I wasn't sure if it was related.
Yeah, there's so many of those things nowadays. It's easy to get them all mixed up.
So ultimately, after polymorph, you went on to Witch House 2, Blood Coven, which ultimately went on to Full Moon Entertainment, correct?
Well, right after Polymorph, I produced a film for Matthew Jason Walsh and Ariana Albright and James L. Edwards called Bloodletting, and that was, like I said, I edited the film and produced it, but they essentially shot it and made it. But then I moved, then I felt sort of the grass growing around my feet in Ohio and moved to California. And what happened was, a short version of it is Dave Dakota kind of circled back into my life since I had moved out there. Okay. He had shot a film called Shrieker, which was 35 millimeter film for Full Moon. And this was right after Full Moon had kind of lost their partnership with Paramount and were kind of back to doing stuff on their own again. And Dakota asked me if I would edit the film and do all the post-production sound and CGI and stuff. And so that was my foot in the door. I was kind of like this unknown guy over the hill. They were down in Hollywood, and I was up in North Hollywood, California. And nobody really knew who I was until I had to go and lock the final edit with Charles Band and his father Albert Band and Dave Dakota. And they were so happy with what I had done, and once they learned sort of how I was doing it and some of these low budget methods of what I was doing, they had me come back and cut Curse of the Puppet Master. And then I wound up, long story short, being their post-production supervisor, and that sort of led me back into making movies for them with Witch House 2, which was originally supposed to be two other things. I was supposed to do they were doing these kids, there's a series called Film Monsters where they took like the classic monsters and made like these 45-minute kid movies out of it. I was supposed to do The Mummy, one. And we had the script and everything, and it was about to go, and I don't remember what happened as to why it didn't, but he called me into a meeting because we were going to do a thing called Fear.com, which later became Horror Vision, which is a film that I did produce for them. But okay. He said, hey, we did this Witch House movie last year, and it's done huge business through Hollywood Video and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, what would you think about going to Romania and doing a sequel? And, of course, you know, at the time, that was the badge of honor. You know, you get to go to Romania and make a horror movie over there. And it was 35 millimeter. So, you know, I was certainly not going to say no to that opportunity. And so, yeah, that's how that came about. But, you know, again, I sort of, even though it was a work for hire thing, I tried to make it my own. And it's really a separate, all three of those Witch House movies, they're kind of completely their own animal. I mean, the only thing that really connects them is there's a character, a witch named Lilith, in all three. But other than that, they really don't have it. None of them have anything to do with each other.
Okay. And then from what I see, you did a short film called Twice the Fun.
Well, that was I'm trying to think, was that before Witch House 2 or was that after? I can't remember the timeline now. Yeah. That's sort of a lost thing because it was I don't remember, it was supposed to be part of an anthology. They had this Surrender Cinema series, which is sort of like their softcore erotica stuff or whatever, and they were looking for shorts to tie together into an anthology or something. So I had done this, yeah, I directed this thing, and it just sat and never got distributed. And then Charlie Band had directed, sort of ghost directed, this thing called noangels.com, which he put a ton of money promoting. He was really pushing this thing. It was sort of like a reality show with these girls making this website, I think it was. And when the DVD came out, I think we were either about to do Witch House 2 or I can't remember, but I got very friendly with the guy who was running the DVD label, and I said, hey, why don't you stick this short film on there so somebody will actually see this thing? And it's just sitting here, and Charlie's not going to do anything with it. So that's the only distribution that it's ever gotten. That's the only way you can even see it, is to find that noangels.com DVD. I'm not even sure it's still in print anymore.
Okay. Cool.
But that's what that was. That was more just sort of a lark, just something for fun.
Definitely. And after Witch House 2, now you were the director behind Witch House 3 then, right?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, when I shot that, the goal was that I was not going to put my name on it. And the only reason was Charlie was thinking about picking up another film called The Coven, I think. I don't remember the exact name of it now, but it was an already finished film that was sort of like a knockoff of The Craft, which was popular at that time. It had just come out.
Okay.
And he was gonna pick this movie up and retitle it Witch House 3, and he gave it to me because he wanted my opinion on the technical qualities of it. I don't remember if it was shot on Super VHS or what. It was shot on video, and it wasn't I remember the production values not being particularly good, but I took it home and I watched it, and I gave the report back to Charlie's right-hand man, this guy Mickey, and I said, you know, if he wants to spend this kind of money, because I think he was going to pay like $10,000 or something for the rights to the movie, so to own it. I said I could go make him something in like a week and a half that would be better than this for 10 grand. Well, next thing I know, Mickey runs to Charlie and says, hey, you know, JR said he can make a movie better than this, than for about the same money. So next thing I know, I'm making this thing because I opened my big mouth. So that's how Witch House 3 came about. So when I went into it initially, I was like, I'll just do this because it would be fun. I wasn't necessarily, it was a complete different, like I said, it was a completely different animal than the second one. And it wasn't like I was trying to top myself or whatever, because we were not shooting on 35 millimeter. It was, you know, the first one was shot in Romania, 35, big cast and crew, a DP who really knew what they were doing. The third one was just we were sort of doing this lowball thing in LA, hit or miss shooting as much as, without permits and all this kind of stuff. So it was really designed to be a much smaller thing. But what happened as I was cutting the thing is that it actually was not bad. I was sort of like, this is a pretty decent little film, for what it is. So I wound up keeping my name on it, and it had a happy ending, I guess.
Very cool. Now, did you work with any actresses or actors from the previous Witch House on Demon Fire, or did you? Cool.
No, in fact, I'm trying to think. That one was, I think that was completely new, because actually Ariana Albright had played the witch in the first 2 films and wasn't interested in doing it for the third, so I enlisted Brink Stevens, who I had known for years, to play that part. And then I really cast it from scratch. I think the only one, Tina Kraus, was in Bloodletting. So I enlisted her, and she came actually from the East Coast with Debbie Rochon. And then I got a California girl, Tanya Dempsey, who had been in Shrieker, the film that I had cut for Dave Dakota that got me into Full Moon. And they were basically the main cast in that film. But yeah, I think that was such a, really was probably one of the smallest casts I've ever had. And it plays more like a sort of a Lifetime witchcraft movie, I guess, because it's very female centric. Which I always thought it would fit in very nicely on the Lifetime channel. They should have probably sold it to them.
Totally understand. And
that's not a bad thing.
Go ahead.
No, I was just saying I don't think that's a bad thing. That's what it was designed.
So ultimately, after Witch House 3, you went on to direct a film called Mega Scorpions.
Well, in between there was a whole bunch of other stuff. I produced a bunch of stuff for So that Witch House 3 sort of set a new, I won't say a new low, but budget wise, it sort of like proved that the shot on video thing had sort of come full circle to the point where you could actually make a decent quality movie on for relatively cheap. And so once Charlie caught wind of that, and of course, you know, we were making things essentially for Blockbuster and Hollywood Video and that kind of thing. And you know, nobody was getting $80 for a VHS tape anymore, so the economics had changed. So I produced a string of movies in between there, but the way the Mega Scorpions, which I refuse to call it that because it was originally called Stingers, and then when we shot it, it was called Deadly Stingers, or when I finished it. But then he later retitled it. The backstory behind that is basically there was a period of time where Fox Home Video was releasing these creature movies.
Okay.
And the guy who ran Fox Home Video was an old friend of Charlie Band's. And Charlie went to him and said, "Hey, we want to make some of this stuff for you. Can we make a deal?" So they made a deal for this giant scorpion movie, and Courtney Joyner had written the script. He already had the script, and basically Charlie turned to me after having produced all this other stuff and said, "Hey, do you want to make this?" And it was one of those things where I think he was getting one price and we were getting another to make it. Like, I'll just throw out these numbers that are probably not totally accurate, but just so you, like, maybe Fox was going to give him $300,000 but I would have maybe 125 to make the film on.
Okay.
And that was my first experience actually shooting HD video. So we did try to upgrade the shot on video thing to actually shoot, although it was never finished in HD. But yeah, we had best of intentions with that one, but it just, I don't know, the giant scorpion puppet never really worked out. It wound up almost entirely being replaced by CGI. What happened was that was the film that I was we were doing a lot of night shoots again. I'm standing up in the middle of nowhere in Northern California at this ranch shooting this thing, and I just sort of looked around and said, you know, what the hell am I doing? This is not like all those years ago when I was making Dead Next Door. This is not what I got into this for. I had sort of become disillusioned by the machine that was Full Moon. You know, for a while it was nice. I was making stuff. I was making good money. It was all good. But I sort of just lost interest in doing that and was ready to just take a big step back and not do that anymore. So I really barely finished that movie. I mean, I sat, I think, with the editor. I didn't even edit the film. I sat with an editor once just to give some notes, and then I was kind of done with it after that. And what wound up happening was by the time the movie was finished, Fox Home Video, I guess, had a couple of other creature features that had been stinkers that hadn't done well. So they just gave up this whole idea to do this. So the movie was orphaned. You know, I think what happened was Fox had the rights, the home video rights to it, and Charlie maybe had the international rights or something. I don't really know how the deal worked, but it just sat because nobody knew who had the rights to it. So it was my sort of lost film for the longest time. Nobody saw it. We showed it at a couple conventions and different things, but that was the only way anybody ever saw the thing. And I forgot about it, moved on to my own thing, running my DVD label and whatever. But years later, it turned up, I think in the UK, maybe somewhere, somebody started sending me like websites that had it listed. And then eventually Charlie Band launched this Full Moon streaming site, and he retitled it Mega Scorpions, and that's how it sort of came back to life again. But it landed with a thud on his streaming service.
I figure about here is where I'll give you a chance to talk about some of the things that you've produced, and also about your label that you called Tempe Video, correct?
Yeah, I go more by Tempe Digital now, but it's the same.
Okay.
It's all the same movies. Well, the distribution thing, I've dabbled in it for a long time, because it was to me the end game was to be able to make movies and get them distributed. But what happens when you try to run your own label is you realize that it's kind of a full-time job, and you're getting other films made or picking up other people's movies, and you don't really have time to make your own things. So I became less of a filmmaker, more of a distributor. And there was a few oddball titles that I wound up financing and having a little bit of input in, and got an executive producer credit on. Things like Platoon of the Dead and Poison Sweethearts and Forest Primeval. Those were titles I distributed 8 or 10 years ago. I
remember a film a couple years back, I think in 2015, called Safe Place, that you helped out.
Safe Inside. Well, that actually was that was my friend Jason Paul Collum made that film, and that he made that completely on his own. I didn't have any involvement in the production of it necessarily, but I did finish the sound mix for him and distributing it. So yeah, that's how that went. But yeah, as far as other films, at this point, I've produced way more movies than I've directed or written, or and it was never my really intention, but it just sort of the way these things go sometimes, I guess. But
as a producer of films, which ones would you say to definitely check out if you were to say?
Produced the stuff that I've produced. Well, Skinned Alive has a lot of fans. That was actually the first film I produced, and didn't direct. It's more of a Texas Chainsaw Massacre kind of vibe, but it's a little sillier than that film. But that one has some fans. There's another one I did years later. My friend David Barton, the makeup effects artist, did for Full Moon, called Dead and Rotting, which is really sort of for that film to have even been released by Full Moon. It's such an oddball movie. It doesn't really fit in that whole category, but that's one I always thought turned out kind of a neat little movie. Okay. I'm trying to think. I mean, I've done so many. You'd think I'd have more recommendations, but Bloodletting is always a popular one. That was a very troubled production because the dynamics of the personalities that were making it, but that one has a lot of fans as well. It's sort of like a Natural Born Killers kind of thing with these two serial killers and falling in love.
Okay. Cool. Well, I figured that's all the time that we have for today. But I hope that some of my questions didn't put you off kilter or anything like that.
No, like I said,
I like learning all the experiences that people go through, and that's why I have people on my show as well, to share some of the background, what you've actually done as a filmmaker, producer, or otherwise. Me myself being a small budding producer myself, I like to hear the different mindsets behind what was going on. I appreciate your time.
Oh, no problem. Thank you for having me.
So, if there's anything else that you'd like to say about anything while we're on, feel free to say so now. But I figure we'll wrap this up here.
Yeah, I think the only thing we missed was to talk about the Robot Ninja restoration, that's the sort of the ongoing thing right now, is that I'm restoring, doing a 2K restoration of Robot Ninja from the original 16mm negatives, and there's got maybe 3 or 4 more days on Indiegogo, and anybody who wants to check that film out and see it in the best quality that it's ever been, and loaded with extras and all those goodies, that'll be out later this year. So that's sort of the next thing up, I guess.
And I know I'm looking forward to that release. I put down for it, so I'm definitely I'm definitely cheering you on to at least get a proper release for it. So,
well, thank you, I appreciate it.
And this was my chance to try to reach out and help in any way, shape, or form that I could. And yeah, you know, every so often fans like to fans of your films probably like to hear little bits and tidbits regardless.
Oh yeah, no, you could drag out some of the old stories again, sure.
Alrighty. Well, in any case, thank you for coming on. I appreciate your time. Definitely check out the campaign. It is still going live for Robot Ninja. You have about 3 or 4 days to check that out, and I'll actually be putting a link to the Indiegogo campaign on my Inside Movies Galore page with this interview, so that way that'll help you out and whatnot.
Great,
so
thank you.
In any case, hopefully you have a great evening, and again, appreciate your time.
No problem. Thanks. You too.
You have a good afternoon.
You too.